Namaste to you all. This morning, dear Sushruta Bhaiya asked me, Krishna, would you please give a conveyance on an excerpt from the Gita? And I celebratorily said, with joy. The paragraph I'd like to exemplify is a paragraph through which was instilled within me in my earlier years growing up in the land of Sanatana Dharma. And that was Karmanyeva Dikaraste Ma Phaleshu Kadakana Ma Karma Phala Heturvu Mate Sangostava Karmani. I'll share a little insight here because we are all in this magnificent playing field. And in this magnificent playing field, the senses continuously come and play with us. We term that as the monkey of the mind. And when the monkey of the mind is given full rein, then it has its consequences. But the moment we begin to recognize the nature of the monkey of the mind, we are no longer feeding that monkey with the nature of the energy that can cause distortions. However, how does one begin to ennoble that presence and focus? There comes the science of yoga. In my earlier years, during my educational levels, right from 3rd grade, 4th grade, all the way up to engineering, my mother used to reflect to me the science of breath. When you breathe in the universe of intelligence into you, and when you breathe out all that can cause any disturbance in your system. Then, with other wise associations and reading profusely the works of Swami Vivekananda, the talks of Paramahamsa, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and other great sages, we reflect upon the nature of the mind. So the analogy that was presented as the nature of the mind was when the mind is as the ocean. If the ocean is turbulent, can you look down and see the grand gifts of the ocean? Whereas when the ocean is calm, you can probe deep into the depths. So as a little boy, growing up in the Andaman Islands, which is where Krishna was born, my mother used to take me out into the jetties. This was in the late 40s. And look down into the waters of the Andaman Sea. And we could look down maybe 40, 50 feet, pristine, clear waters, and just there to observe nature. So in the observation of nature, we see movement, we see form, we see color and presence. When we can just absorb this with no association of attachment, there is a freedom that births. That freedom that births is an expression of pure joy, which we see in nature as we see the unfurling of a bud to a flower. It is nurtured in light. So, my mother used to always then refer to me, observe nature and everything there is to know will come to you. Another, live with this observation in all your life and exemplify every moment with this observation. Keyword. Does the sun ask of the earth, what are you giving me in return? Does the sun ask of the earth, what are you giving me in return? Such a simple observation, but conveys an enormous depth that can nourish us, nurture us, and propagate brilliance in every action, because it is from the detached state, and the detached state of that such action is governed by the symbol of the lotus. The lotus can grow in a murky water, but is it affected? How do we apply this into day-to-day life? That is the wonderful initiation. That is the joyful initiation. So the moment we begin to look at this not as a situation of complexity, but rather a symphony of how to attain our intrinsic essence, which is what dear Krishna conveyed to Arjuna. Living this is the joy. Living this is the exemplified happiness that can thrive. Why? When joy pours forth, happiness is secondary to it. Happiness is the outcome of joy. So I'd like to share practices based upon the influence of the Gita in the life of Krishna, this guy right here, that was the name given to me, and how it continues to sustain in every walk of life, all across the world, where today I find that in the fields in which I have been interfaced, takes me across the planet, sharing, teaching, conducting research, and conveying the essence, ultimately, of the living embodiment of the Gita. It is a work, continuous work in progress. Just as each wave of the ocean comes and nourishes the shore, similarly, every wave is a thought. And one thought flows to another, and it continuously comes and caresses the shore, connecting the thoughts together so that they all function synchronously is ultimately the essence. So, keeping that sloka in mind, karmanyeva dhikaraste ma paleshu kadakana ma karma pala heturbu ma te sangostava karmani. I created a tablet, and on this tablet I had a line through the middle with two columns of the left and right. One column exemplified strengths, the other column said, usually with strength, what would be the second corollary to it?
Weakness.
Louder. Weakness. Okay, beautiful. So we have strengths, weakness. Now let's go a little deeper and examine the thought itself. If we say weakness, what does that do energetically? It's depleting, isn't it? But let's redefine the word weakness as lack of strength. Now, does lack of strength exemplify weakness? Yes? No? Or maybe? Go ahead, let's get feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we say lack of strength, which means that it shows that we have the potential to bring our strengths ultimately to phase the strengths and the lack of strength so that they become one entity, one field. So which means that we are never in a position to consider that we have a weakness, but rather that which requires nourishment through attention, through an intrinsic discipline. That intrinsic discipline coming together, how does it manifest? We've got to feed it. To feed it. So I begin with the day with strengths and lack of strengths, and I'll make some notes as to what are the strengths and what are the areas that require strengthening. So I will take one topic in the lack of strengths and examine that through the course of the entire day. Observation, pure observation, and at the end of the day I give a review as to how the nature of the mind, so now we come back to recognizing by observation to the nature of the mind, of how did we evaluate the course of the day to the arena of the lack of strengths. The next day I'll take an area of strength and observe that. Pure observation leads one ultimately to living as the embodiment of the lotus. We can immerse ourselves but be unaffected. And isn't that the ultimate state that's given to us by the presence of nature itself? And when we look at this in terms of the human energy field, which is the arena in which a vast amount of Krishna's research today is being conducted on the study of consciousness and the teaching of it, we have our chakras, right from the Muladhara to the Sahasrara. We can be in the murkiest of waters. We can go through all events. But when we draw that energy up to the crown, then we open this gateway to what? What is cosmic nature? What is cosmic presence? It's pure plasma, which is also in the transmissions that Krishna transmitted to dear Arjuna. The wealth of wisdom, the wealth of application, the wealth of inner nourishment is all completely connected in this one transmission. It's so full, it's so embodied. Nowhere else on this planet do we have such wealth. Bringing back, coming again to the strengths and the lack of strengths. Take each one as it is. Doesn't matter if we stumble and fall. What did Swami Vivekananda say? Keep a high vision. And do that. Continue with it. If you stumble and fall, does not matter. Pick yourself back up, but keep the high vision always in front of you. Then every individual with infinite energy, infinite enthusiasm, infinite patience, infinite daring, and infinite love, we can accomplish more than an entire mob in a century. Well, what's being called upon to us today is that exemplar that can guide us to such propensities of brilliance. Today, in the land of Bharat, we have these gifts, and all of you here, guided by Guruji, Dr. Nagendra, and all his wonderful team, you're very blessed to be here. And it's purposeful that you are all here, because what we can then bring forth can transform the consciousness of humankind. And why does Krishna share this? Because today we see in the world of business that there is highly arenas of rajasic and tamasic behavior. And it continues to perpetuate. However, we know that ultimately truth will prevail. The sattvic nature, and ultimately we even threshold beyond the sattvic nature. Then we are totally unaffected. Then all governance will be for, as the sun asks, does the sun ask of the earth, what are you giving me in return? So, I find the guidance and direction that Krishna has been directed to is now conducting seminars towards corporate wellness, which has been now in initiation both in the United States, here in Bharat, and very soon in other parts of the world. But why? Because we see founders of companies, CEOs of organizations are finding that there is a huge elemental particle that is missing inside. You can bring success, and the measurement of success today in the Rajasic world is the activities of the stock market and taking care of its shareholders. But what are the consequences of those who provide the goods and services? What happens? What are we doing to the earth? What are we doing to the sacred land, to the waters, to the environment? Have we given consideration to all the following? And we've created an economy of consumption. All this from what? The attachments. And the attachments lead to discordant behaviors. Discordant behaviors ultimately lead to further discordance. And further discordance leads to disassociation of oneself to oneself. If we do not know thyself, how can we continue with what we are doing? Step number one is let us work towards internal perfection. We sought external excellence through practices. In the US, it began with a practice called 6 Sigma. Some of you may have heard of it. It was 6 Sigma for external excellence. Today it is 6 Sigma for internal excellence. But how is that internal excellence conveyed? Where we see from the Gita Krishna as being the ultimate CEO of an organization. And Arjuna is all of us who perform the action, but perform the action without the attachment to the action. So here we are introducing the science of yoga in the West to CEOs of companies. And this has been a great blessing. Why? Because most of the business schools in the US, the leading business schools in the US, are being run by those who were born in Bharat. Even though they've all been educated abroad, they are also integrating now the sciences of yoga, exactly as how dear Krishna had transmitted to Arjuna. We will venture into all these areas. Many of you are here studying the sciences of yoga in your undergraduate courses and your graduate courses, and very soon you will all be out into the world, either starting your own little ashrams or your yoga centers, and then the play of commerce will come about. When one is able to see that we can weave all this together, seeking always internal perfection, being guided towards internal perfection, keeping the vision at the highest space, what is my purpose of being? The moment we are able to do that, let us see in nature what happens. One lotus grows in a pond. Very soon there will be 2, very soon there will be 3, and then very soon there's a multiplicity of lotuses, all emerge from that one lotus that lives in the murkiest of waters. And what does it do? It just exemplifies herself, and for those who take that moment of stillness to see and appreciate this beauty are there to receive it. So, cultivation of patience is a very important factor, which means being able to be still in the midst of intensity, in the midst of action. Be still. This was a teaching that was transmitted. The practice of it is the most powerful of all. What we read, what we assimilate, then convey that into practice. And you can convey that practice in day-to-day life, in every moment of it. How? By attunement. And attuning ourselves is the disciplines of what you are taught here. So, having practiced this continuously every day, it's actually in every moment, it no longer is an effort. It's smooth, it flows, just as a wave, and you can soften the waters by the nature of the breath. Utilize the gifts that we have. This field that we have is connected to the cosmic intelligence, unboundedly. Tap it. Tap it while you are here. Draw from the great wisdom that you have here. Use that in your work, use that in your practice, and travel out as lotuses, each and every one of you, conveying the greatest gifts that beings like dear Swami Vivekananda conveyed to raise the bar of a nation and to ultimately raise the bar that can transform the collective consciousness in the entire world, which is much, much required today. Hari Om. Let's all recite an Om together.